In question 26, we're being asked about the female sex hormones involved in the menstrual cycle, and we're asked within this table here, which row shows the role of the female sex hormones in the menstrual cycle. Now, having a look over our table, we can see that the only two hormones that we need to worry about are estrogen and progesterone. So, we need to recall what the role of each of these are in relation to three distinct events. Firstly, the causing of the thickness of the uterus lining. Secondly, the maintenance of the uterus lining. And finally, a breakdown of the uterus lining. So, what we should be able to notice immediately is that this is in chronological order in the menstrual cycle. First, we'll have a thickening of the uterus lining, perhaps in preparation for the implantation of a fertilized ovum. Secondly, we have the maintenance of this uterus lining throughout the menstrual cycle. And finally, at the end of the menstrual cycle, we have a breakdown of the uterus lining if there has not been an implantation. Okay, so in order to answer this question, we need to understand how these sex hormones relate to this chronology. So, we should know that estrogen is produced by the ovaries, whereas progesterone is produced within the ovaries, but actually by the corpus luteum, which is the product of a ruptured developing follicle after the ovum has been released. So there is no progesterone concentration change until the ovum has been released from the ovary. So, prior to this, there must be a thickened uterus lining in order to facilitate the potential implantation of a fertilized egg. So, prior to the changes in progesterone concentration, it is a rise in oxygen concentration which facilitates the thickening of the uterus lining, as well as the release of the uterus lining. So, we should, if perhaps you recall the details of the menstrual cycle hormones, you should know that the release of the ovum is mediated by estrogen, causing the rise in LH, or luteinizing hormone, which facilitates the release of the ovum. So, we should remember that an increase in the oxygen concentration is what causes the thickening of the uterus lining. So, we can immediately see our answer is either option C or option E. Now, perhaps you wouldn't recognise that, in which case it's perfectly fine to skip one column and move on to the other two. So, we can start with the maintenance of the uterus lining, which we should remember is done by progesterone. So, a high progesterone concentration is what maintains the uterus lining. Looking across our rows here, the only viable one which is left out of C and E, which has a high progesterone concentration maintaining the uterus lining, is option C. So we can say that C is our answer. Let's move on to the next column just to make sure that we're right. What causes a breakdown in the uterus lining is a collapse in the progesterone concentration towards the end of the menstrual cycle, and that indicates that there's been no implantation and that the uterus lining can now break down in a period. So we have our answer, which is option C, that a rise and then a fall in progesterone concentration enables the maintenance and then the breakdown of the uterus lining, and so that's our answer to the question, option C.